Good evening. Like, why wouldn't I not know that? My name is Douglas Griffin. This is my Wednesday night Bible study. It's happening 1 hour early this week and next week. And then I'll be back on my normal schedule. So for you, those of you though who are on the East Coast, like Dottie and others, Roger, like you're probably happy about this. Of course, you probably didn't remember that starting a week early. I mean, a week early, an hour early, and then you're like, "What's going on?" When you know. Okay. Anyway, we are going through the book of Luke. Luke is going to lead us to the book of Acts because Luke wrote both books, and from there we're going to go to the book of Revelation. How are they possibly connected? Um, so again, Luke is writing this book years after Jesus. Well, they all four of them, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, were written obviously after Jesus was crucified and resurrected. But he's writing for a specific purpose, because by this time the gospel had spread to the Gentiles. God made an obligation to bring the gospel to the Jews, focus on the Jews. They couldn't stand before him on Judgment Day and say, "You didn't tell us." He brought it to the Jews, and many Jews received the gospel. They were the first ones to receive the gospels. They're the people that God chose to bring the gospel through. So, yay for the Jews, you know. But now it's also starting to reach out to the Gentiles. But it had to go in that order. First the Jews, and then the Samaritans, who were pretending to be Jews, who were Jew wannabes, and then to the rest of the world. And that way no one could complain on Judgment Day and say, "Well, you skipped us." No, I told you what the order would be. I did the order. You may have heard none of that because my earphones was on the table instead of in the little earphone box. And so it could have been connected to my computer. I don't understand why all these things talk to each other. My iPad talks to my computer, which talks to my phone, and I don't want them to talk to each other. Anyway, so just in case you heard none of that, my name is Douglas Griffin. We're going through the book of Luke. We're choosing Luke because he also wrote the book of Acts. He's writing to defend Paul and why Paul is now preaching to the Gentiles. And he's predicting, Jesus in this chapter begins predicting the judgment that's going to come on Israel. And I believe that the book of Revelation previews the destruction that's coming on Israel. Many people believe that the book of Revelation previews a destruction that is yet to come. That's going to come someday, that Jesus was talking about something a couple thousand years away. But I believe he was talking about something that was 40 years away. And so so I'll show you, and you're free once I'm finished showing you this, Luke, Acts, the book of Revelation, to go, that man doesn't know what he's talking about. But at least you will have heard it. Okay, so in Luke chapter 11, Jesus is in the last 6 months of his ministry. He had a 3.5-month ministry. First 3 years, 3.5 month, bless my heart, 3.5-year ministry. I just heard my wife say, not month, hello. 3.5-year ministry. And the first 3 years, he's just preaching the good news. He's fulfilling every prophecy. Matthew recorded every prophecy that Jesus fulfilled. Well, not everyone, but plenty of them. And he is healing the blind and people who are paralyzed and walking water and all kind of miraculous miracles so that people would know he was the Messiah. So they would know. Let me read this. Oh, you did hear it. Oh, good. Okay. Thank you. I can't do this without my wife explaining things to me. Okay. So, in the last 6 months of his ministry, because it's 3.5 years, he is now warning Israel of the destruction to come. I've done enough that any normal person would go, there's something about that person because he just opened the eyes of the blind. A guy who was paralyzed got up out of his bed. That man who was deaf can now hear. The boy who was mute can now speak. That demon possessed woman is now free. There's something going on with him. There's enough. There was enough. And God's just not going to write it in big skywriting across the sky. You better believe or I'll burn you up. He gives us enough that if we really want to believe, it's there for us. And if you don't want to believe, God's not going to go through extraordinary means. He's not going to throw his pearls before swine. If you don't want to believe, I'm going to do this much and no more. If you want to believe, what he does is enough. You'll go, well, you know what? I wanted to believe, and now I believe because look what. So now he's saying, here's the destruction that's going to come on all the non-believers. And that's what Luke is covering, really starting back a few chapters. But for the rest of it, he's covering the destruction that's coming on Jerusalem, which I believe, again, is prophesied about in the book of Revelation. I believe that the book of Revelation was written before Jerusalem fell. In fact, there's a book called Before Jerusalem Fell that's really good, as opposed to after Jerusalem fell. There are those who believe it's written after Jerusalem fell and therefore is talking about a future destruction that's coming on the entire world, where the word for earth just means land. So the whole land or the whole earth. You can translate it earth or land. If you translate it land, you go, oh, this destruction is coming on all the land, and he just means Jerusalem. Or you may say this destruction is coming on all the earth, and it means the entire earth. So those who translate it one way are waiting for this destruction is coming on the earth soon. Those who translate it as a different way that says, well, this happened before Jerusalem fell, you believe that the destruction is only coming on Jerusalem, and which is what happened in 70 AD. So the book was either written 4 years before Jerusalem fell or 10 years after Jerusalem fell. It just interestingly never mentions the destruction of Jerusalem. The whole book of Revelation talks about Jerusalem several times, never mentions that it got destroyed. You think that'd be something that you want to mention somewhere and say, oh, and isn't it terrible what happened to Jerusalem? Never mentions it because it hadn't happened yet. All right, so Luke 11, this is my part 4 in Luke 11, starting with verse 37. And as he spoke, talking about Jesus, a certain Pharisee asked him to dine with him. So Jesus was talking about, well, it doesn't matter what he's talking about. Jesus is always talking. You're always talking, Jesus. As he spoke, a certain Pharisee came and said, oh, will you come to my house for lunch? I'd like to entertain you. Now he's really coming to check him out. Jesus knows that. I know you're just trying to check me out. And that's fine, because I got something to tell you. So he went in and sat down to eat. And when the Pharisee saw it, he marveled that he had not first washed before dinner. Now, was Jesus nasty? No. He had not first, the word washed is the word baptizo, which is the same word that they use for baptism. He had not first had a baptism before dinner. Like go to the water and get baptized. No, he meant this thorough washing, that he had not first wash his hands, his feet, his legs, his body, like somebody invites you to dinner and they make you take a shower first and then you can come sit down for dinner. Not just go wash your hands, go take a bath, and then I'll let you eat my food. That's kind of drastic. But that's what the Pharisees did. They had a huge ceremony, a thorough washing. Before they did anything, they just made it this big, huge thing, which the Bible never asked for that. Yes, you please wash your hands. But why do you have to wash your knees? Unless you're eating the food with your knees, is that necessary? So that's what he's marveling at. You didn't baptize, you didn't have a baptizo before dinner. In Mark chapter 7, verse 3, Mark covers this sort of thing. He says, for the Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they wash their hands in a special way, holding the tradition of the elders. The Bible never says do it that way. There's a whole bunch of things that the Bible never says and that they become traditions in our church. The Bible never says that. Okay, I can't spend a lot of time. I've got to do this fast. So, uh, Luke 11, verse 39. Then the Lord said to him, now you Pharisees make the outside of the cup and dish clean, but your inward part is full of greed and wickedness. And he's saying, you are so concerned with the outward appearance that because you do everything with a flourish for people to see. That's why you're doing it, to get applause. But your insides have bad motives. So it doesn't matter. You make the outside clean, but the inside is full of greed and wickedness. It says, foolish ones, verse 40, did not he who made the outside make the inside also? Don't they both have to be clean? Now he's talking about a cup or a plate or a pot that you're serving the food in. You got to clean the inside too before you put food in there, but you just make the outside pretty and show it to everybody and they're all impressed, but the inside's still nasty. Didn't God make the outside and inside? And he's talking about you personally. This is a metaphor. So if you're doing all this for a show, but the inside is full of evil motives, God's not impressed. In Hosea 6:6, and Jesus is not making this up, that God was telling them stuff like this constantly, but we just pick and choose what part of the Bible we want to believe. Hosea 6:6, for I desire mercy and not sacrifice, and the knowledge of God more than burnt offerings. And we can just park there for a minute. I desire for you to love your brother and not have to do the sacrifice as apology for what you do to your brother. Because they would do the sacrifice after they'd sinned. I'd rather you not harm your brother and then bring a sacrifice. I'd rather you just love your brother. I desire the love and not the sacrifice. I'm not sacrifice. And plus, if you bring the sacrifice, but you still haven't repented, I'm not impressed. It says, I desire the knowledge of God more than these burnt offerings. I want you to know what I want you to do and then do it. But being evil and then just showing up with an offering, look, God, I brought an offering. I was like, so? You still evil? I can read your thoughts. Sorry. 1 Samuel 15:22. Samuel says to Saul, has the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord? I told you to do this and you didn't do what I asked you to do. But we burnt all these offerings for you. I don't care. I don't want the offerings. I want your heart, your obedience. You think I'm like starving and oh, thank God they cooked some food. Ooh, I was just about to drop out. No, God doesn't need the offerings. The offerings are supposed to be representative of a repentance that's come in our heart. But if you just do the offering without the repentance, but I'd rather have you to obey me so you don't have to do the offering. So he says to obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed than the fat of rams. To heed to my voice better than, the fat of rams, that really impresses me. No, it doesn't if you haven't obeyed me. Micah 6, verse 6. With what shall I come before the Lord and bow myself before the high God? What do I bring before him? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Micah 6:8. He has shown you, O man, what is good and what does the Lord require of you. This is all that God wants from you. To do justly, I mean, be fair with people, love mercy, and walk humbly before God. That's what he's requiring of you. That's what I really want. More than the sacrifice, more than the impressive offerings. I gave $1,000 in church today, which, thank you, lovely. You helped feed a bunch of homeless. Please keep doing that. But if it's all coming from a rotten heart, it doesn't do you any good. It certainly helped those homeless people. Didn't do you any good. You didn't get any points from God from it because it was all just for show. Isaiah 58, verse 3. Why have we fasted, they say, and you have not seen? Why have we afflicted our souls and you take no notice? In fact, in the day of your fast, so it's like I've fasted for you, God. I've afflicted and nothing has changed in my life. Well, he says, in fact, in the day of your fast, you found pleasure. I mean, you went off and did wicked stuff and you exploit all your laborers. You're mean to people. While you're fasting and saying, Lord, have forgiveness, you're going off and doing wicked stuff. So I don't care that you're fasting if you're still being evil to people. Verse 6 of Isaiah 58. Is this not the fast that I have chosen? Here's what if you want to fast, do this. Loose the bonds of wickedness. Stop being evil to people. Stop roping people into your wicked acts. Undo heavy burdens. Like stop making people do egregious things and lift these heavy burdens all the time. Stop being so mean to your laborers and your workers. Here's in the path, let the oppressed go free. Break all these yokes that you've put on people. Is it not to share your bread with the hungry? That's a fast. You want to know what a fast? Share your bread with the hungry. Bring to your house the poor who are cast out. When you see the naked, cover him and not hide yourself from your own flesh and blood. That would be the fast I'd appreciate, not just, oh, I didn't eat today. Aren't you impressed, God? No, not impressed. Okay, back to it. So when Jesus is saying this stuff to them, when he's saying, he who made the outside of the cup also made the inside of the cup. Like God's looking on the outside and the inside. He's referring to these scriptures. He's referring to these things that God has been telling people all along. Verse 41. But rather, this is a hard verse to understand. Give alms of such things as you have. Or here's a better translation. Give from your heart from what's inside. Then indeed all things will be clean to you. So a better way of saying this is, if your virtue consists in washing the outside and making a respectable appearance, instead, cultivate rather the loving brotherly spirit of inward righteousness, which will prompt you to give of the food which the vessels contain. So you've cleaned the outside. What about give the food that's inside the vessels to the poor? Don't impress with somebody with how all your serving dishes are incredible and all your, oh my God, I'm so impressed. Look how you've done this and how you've done that. You are so impressive. Not really. Not that impressed with you. Give the food that's in the dishes to the poor. Doesn't mean you can never eat. Never eat. Just starve to death and then you'll be dead soon. But he's saying, I'm not impressed with all the pageantry. I'm impressed when you share what you have with others. In Titus chapter 1, because he's looking at our hearts when we do whatever actions we do. Titus chapter 1, verse 15. To the pure, all things are pure, but to those who are defiled and unbelieving, nothing is pure. So to the pure, all things are pure. I used to think, to the innocent-minded, everything that somebody does, they assume that they're also innocent in their actions. Well, to the pure, all things are pure. So that person grabbed my purse, grabbed my wallet. They must be going to put money in it for me. So to the simple-minded, to the pure, all things are pure. They don't ever suspect anyone of having bad motives. Sometimes I fall into that category. People who just think, oh, I'm sure they had a good motive for that. But he's saying, to the people who do things from a pure motive, then everything they do turns out to be pure. He says, but to those who are defiled and unbelieving, nothing is pure, because everything you do turns out to be evil, because you have evil motives. But even their mind and their conscience are defiled. They profess to know God. This is Titus 1:16. They profess to know God, but in works they deny him, being abominable, disobedient, and disqualified for every good work. So what were those scriptures? This is Roddy's going to ask. What were those scriptures earlier? Hosea 6:6, 1 Samuel 15:22, Micah 6, verses 6 and 8, Isaiah 58, verse 3 and 6 through 7. And that was Titus 1, verses 15 through 16. So back to Luke. So Jesus is talking to him, and he's kind of mad. The Pharisee thought, I'll invite Jesus over and then I'll get him on something. Oh, you haven't washed. You got to go to the pool and do all this pageantry. That will impress people. Look how clean I am. And Jesus is like, you aren't clean. And I know your motive and why you invited me here. And he pronounces 6 woes. In Matthew, there were 7 woes, but in Matthew, he pronounced it in Jerusalem. He's not in Jerusalem yet. So we think that Jesus had this conversation a couple times because it was worth repeating. It's not like he called all the Pharisees together. Hey, Pharisees, I've got this really heavy message to deliver to you. So can you just gather all the Pharisees from all over earth? He didn't do that. He said it to this group of Pharisees, said the same thing to that group of Pharisees, said the same thing to that group of Pharisees. So Luke is recording a different time than Matthew recorded in Matthew chapter 23. But here are 6 woes that, like, this is what's going to get you in trouble. I have to tell my nephew, Call your dad. Call your dad. Okay. So, woe to you, Pharisees, Luke 11:42. For you tithe mint and rue, all manner of herbs. No, you tithe mint and rue is a thing. Rue is a thing, R-U-E, and all manner of herbs. So they would give a tenth of their cinnamon and their nutmeg and their oregano and give it. And there were some delicious meals on that altar, okay? Because they're with that lamb. Plus, I'm tithing some mint and root, and this is gonna be delicious, okay? But you pass by justice and the love of God. Like you taught, I'm asking for justice. I'm asking for mercy and you to be a wonderful person, and you just skip over those. But you impress everybody. Look, I'm giving a tenth of my oregano. Are you impressed? No, God's not impressed. These you ought to have done. Yes, I want you to tithe without leaving the others undone. Can you do both? Tithe. So God, Jesus is not saying, I'm so mad at you for tithing. He's saying, I'm mad at you for thinking that's all you have to do and that you can still be an evil person. But in front of everybody else, look what I've done. Look what I brought to the temple. But you're still evil. Woe number 2, verse 43. Woe to you, Pharisees, for you love the best seats in the synagogues and greetings in the marketplace. As opposed to, here, take my seat. No, I want to be seen. I sit in the best seats because that's why you're at the synagogue, just to be seen, not to learn from the scriptures. Verse 44. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you are like graves which are not seen, and the men who walk over them are not aware of them. So, there was a Levitical law against touching dead things because, again, during this time period, they didn't know why it had died. So it was best not to touch someone who was dead. They did not understand disease at that point. We still don't understand it. Virus, and thank God we wash our hands. We touch stuff all the time. We can't see it there. They really couldn't see it, right? That person's dead. And they go, oh no, uncle's dead. It's like, okay, now I'm going to be dead in a week and I don't even know why. So Jesus is like, don't touch dead bodies. Numbers chapter 19, verse 16. It said, whoever in the open field touches one who was slain by a sword or who has died. So, period. They may not have died by disease. Maybe they're just slain by a sword. You still don't know what disease they had earlier, before the sword got them. Or a bone of a man. Ooh, look at that bone. Let's pick that up. No. Or a grave. Because they didn't bury them very deeply. He says, they shall be unclean for 7 days. You have to quarantine, because you don't know what disease that was. Many cases, it was not a disease, but you don't know what case that is. So just as a general rule, don't touch anything dead. So he says, you are like graves which are unseen. People are stepping on you and getting diseases, and they don't even know it. You're like an unseen, invisible grave. Okay, we think he was referring to Tiberias, which is a city that when Herod was building the city of Tiberias in order to impress Emperor Tiberius, the senator, they discovered that they were building it on top of graves. So the Jews were like, we're not going to keep building on top of it. And Herod made them build it anyway and had to bribe people to live in the city of Tiberias on top of graves. So they were doing it they didn't realize they were building it, on unseen graves until they started digging up the city to put in the walls and like, we built this on top of a graveyard. That's not good. Different than when he said it later, how Matthew recorded it. Matthew in chapter 23, verse 27, when Jesus was talking about graves, he said, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you are like whitewashed tombs, which indeed appear beautifully outwardly, but inside are full of dead men's bones and all uncleanness. So they would wipe the tomb so everybody knew there was a grave there. So in Luke, Jesus is talking about unseen graves because he was nearer the city of Tiberias and people would know what he's talking about. Later, when he got to Jerusalem, when Jesus again preached the same sermon, but preached it a little differently, he says, you're like those whitewashed tombs. that people make white. Everybody knows there's somebody buried there, so they won't touch it. And so the tomb is beautiful, but inside it's just full of death. Why did you make the tomb so beautiful and so impressive? It's just full of death. You're just like them. Outside beautiful, but inside you're just full of dead men's bones. Verse 28 of Matthew 23. Even so you outwardly appear righteous to men, but inside you're full of hypocrisy and lawlessness. Back to Luke. Luke 11, verse 45. Then one of the lawyers answered him and said to him, one of the lawyers answered him. So there are Pharisees and the lawyers. These are the Pharisees and the scribes. Two different functions. The Pharisees were in charge of keeping all the traditions. That was their function. If we keep all the traditions, then God will love us, even though God never gave them those traditions. The lawyers were the ones who studied the law and were the ones who were pointing out to everybody whenever they did something wrong. The law says this, the law says that, the law says this, and they're making, and you're going to go to hell. The Pharisees saying you're going to go to hell because you didn't keep our traditions. The lawyers are saying you're going to go to hell because you missed these different finer points of the laws. So one of the lawyers who happened to be there at this dinner answered and said to him, "Teacher, by saying these things, you reproach us also. You don't mean, I know you don't mean to do it, but you're getting on us also." And in Luke chapter 11, verse 46, he said, "Well, woe to you also, lawyers. Guess what? I did that on purpose. For you load men with burdens hard to bear, and you yourselves do not touch the burdens with one of your fingers. You point out what everybody else is doing, and you secretly are not keeping the law, but you're making them do it and making them feel bad and making them pay penance. And you're going to have to, give an offering. You messed up here, got to give an offering. You messed up, got to give an offering to make up for that. You messed up, you got to give an offering to make up for that, right?" That tradition kind of carried over into the early Catholic Church, where every time you sinned, you would have to give an offering, and they called it an indulgence. In fact, you could buy your way out of hell and into heaven if you had enough money. You just keep paying money for those sins. And this way the church was making lots of money. Just keep pointing out sin. You know it's a sin to wear purple after Labor Day? What? Yes, $50. Thank you. Now you're going to go to heaven. So he says you load them with burdens too hard to bear, and you yourself do not touch the burdens with one of your fingers. In Isaiah chapter 10, verse 1, it says, "Woe to those who decree unrighteous decrees, who write misfortune." It's because the lawyers wrote everything down, which they have prescribed. Why do they do it? To rob the needy of justice, to take what is right from the poor of my people, that widows may be their prey, and that they may rob the fatherless. So we come up with laws sometimes in our cities that put an undue burden on the poor, and people are losing their homes and losing their jobs, and because we put too much of a pressure on them. And the point is for the richer people to get their property. So we move them out. All those poor people, we declare this property belongs to the city, and so we're just moving you out. This is ours now. In some cases, some of these properties are being restored. There are different families who maybe in the early 1900s, the city just took their property away from them. And now they're filing lawsuits and their ancestors are getting those properties back. But that's a thing. Like, we're very rich and powerful, whoever we are. It could be any we, not pointing the finger at any specific person, just any we using their power really to take what the poor have, because the poor are so defenseless. And Jesus is like, I'm going to get you for that. On Judgment Day, you'll be sorry. And that's what the whole parable of Lazarus and the rich man and the poor man, then the rich man, Lazarus is poor. It's like, okay, maybe in this life you got away with it, but guess what? You're going to be in hell. Sorry, for eternity. And Lazarus is going to be in heaven, and that will be worse. So this little short time you had on earth, you're going to spend eternity in hell because I was watching your heart and you were evil. Woe to you. This is woe number 5. Where is it? I lost it. Woe to you. Luke 11:47. For you build the tombs of the prophets, and your fathers killed them. In fact, you bear witness that you approve the deeds of your fathers, for they indeed killed them, and you build their tombs. So God, well, they're both the same person, sent prophets to warn people for 1,000 years. He sends prophets to warn them, send prophets to warn them, send prophets to warn them. And they ended up just killing them all because I don't want to hear it. Kill that prophet. There, got rid of that. Well, God's still watching, and there's going to be a price to pay. So he says, you have built the tombs as memorials to these prophets. Oh, we feel so sorry that these prophets were killed. Let's build a tomb as a memorial. He said, but instead of, you're really approving of their acts because you're doing the same things that they did. So you build these wonderful memorials, but I'm here, I'm preaching, and you're ready to stone and kill me. So you're them. You're the sons of the people who did that. And even though you built these wonderful tombs to honor them, you really are just doing the same things. In Matthew chapter 23, verse 29 and 30, it says, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because you build the tombs of the prophets and adorn the monuments of the righteous and say, if we had lived in the days of the fathers, we would not have been partakers with them in the blood of the prophets." Really? Because you're about to put me on the cross and kill me. Therefore, Luke 11, verse 49, the wisdom of God also says, well, I will send them prophets and apostles to warn them. And when did he do this? In 2 Chronicles chapter 24, verse 19. 2 Chronicles chapter 24, verse 19. He says, yet he sent prophets to them to bring them back to the Lord. And they testified against them, but they would not listen. The prophets testified against them. You're doing wrong, stop it. But they would not listen. Then the Spirit of God came upon Zechariah, the son of Jehoiada the priest, who stood above the people and said to them, thus says God, why do you transgress the commandments of the Lord so that you cannot prosper? God's not going to prosper your lives. Because you have forsaken the Lord, he's forsaken you. That's why things are going badly. So they conspired against him, and at the command of the king, they stoned him with stones in the courthouse of the Lord, on the way to the temple. They killed him. So he says, I will send them prophets and apostles, and I just quoted from where he's saying that he's going to do that. And some of them they will kill and persecute. So God knows what they're going to do. But you can't stand before him on Judgment Day, because Judgment Day is like eternal, like there's not a do-over or something. That's the final judgment. So, well, no one ever warned me. So I'm sending them a prophet. I'm sending these apostles to warn them. Even though I know they're going to kill them, they won't be able to say, I'm fair. I knew you were going to reject it, but you cannot say you never heard. So some of them will kill them and persecute. They will persecute. And that the blood of all the prophets which was shed from the foundation of the world is going to be required of this generation. So Jesus says that the judgment is going to come on this generation. He's talking about the generation that Jesus is talking to, the one right in front of him. Not some future generation 2,000 years later. Jesus is saying it's all the blood of all the prophets which was shed, the punishment from the foundation of the world might be required of this generation. From the blood of Abel to the blood of Zechariah. Zechariah is the one that we just read from 2 Chronicles, who preached to them and they killed him. And he was the last prophet that Jesus sent, Jesus sent for that purpose. From Abel, standing there and giving a righteous sacrifice to God, and instead of Cain going, wow, let me change because his sacrifice was approved, so let me bring a sacrifice and not this fruit of the ground because I know what I'm supposed to do. So I'll take a lamb and no, I'm going to kill Abel. So I held back my punishment. I was merciful. I've been merciful to all these generations, but storing up judgment, it's all going to fall on this generation because this generation actually got the Messiah. You have no excuse. I walked on water. I'm going to rise from the dead. And you still are going to not believe me. So you saw people rise from the dead. That little girl who was killed. Lazarus came out the tomb, and instead of repenting and go, well, if this person can rise people from the dead, I need to listen to him. So you rejected, God showed up, and you rejected him. So all of it's going to come on this generation. So he says, yes, I say to you, it shall be required of this generation, Luke 11:51. Ezekiel chapter 3, verse 18 says, when I say to the wicked, you shall surely die, and you give him no warning nor speak to warn the wicked from his wicked ways to save his life, that same wicked man shall die in his iniquity, but his blood I required at your hand. Yet, if you warn the wicked, and he does not turn from his wickedness, not from his wicked way, he shall die his iniquity, but you have delivered your soul. So Jesus is saying, this is why I'm warning you. I must warn you what's coming. So woe to you lawyers, Luke 11:52. This is the last verse, last couple of verses. For you have taken away the key of knowledge. The way to enter into the kingdom, you've taken that away from people and you've made it something else that it is not. You've told them, the only way you're going to get into the kingdom is if you tithe of this and give this burnt. It's like, no, it's your heart. I always told you that I wanted your hearts. It says, you took away the key of knowledge and you did not enter in yourselves. And those who are entering in, you've hindered. People who are trying to listen to me and believe me, you're kicking them out of the temple and threatening them. Verse 53. And as he said these things to them, the scribes and the Pharisees began to assail him vehemently and to cross-examine him about many things, lying in wait for him and seeking to catch him in something he might say that they might accuse him. Like, we're going to have to kill this person. Instead of, oh, we better listen. What if he's right? No, let's just kill him. And Jesus is saying, you're like this is what they did. This is what your fathers did when the prophets came. Kill him. So you're conspiring to kill me, and you don't see that it's the same thing? Bless your hearts. But Jesus keeps preaching to them for the next 6 months. I'm going to preach to them every single time I see them. I'm going to keep preaching them and warn them of the destruction that's coming on this generation. And he says that 3 times just in this chapter, this generation. So I'm always surprised when people say, he was talking about 2,000 years from now. No. But okay. So thank you so much for listening. Again, next week, it'll be the same thing. I'm going to start an hour early, and then I'll go back to Douglas Standard Time. On weekends, on Sundays, I am teaching in the book of Numbers, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and it all ties together, right? Because the Bible is just one story. So I would invite you, when you get the opportunity, some of you think, ooh, the Old Testament is so boring. It's so not boring. It may be more interesting than the New Testament, because the New Testament is just the fulfillment of all this phenomenal stuff in the Old Testament. But I'm grateful that you even watch once a week or once a month or once a year. You just click over. So I'm grateful of anything, and I hope it's been of a help to you. Okay, I'm all done. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you, some of you this Sunday for Sunday school. Others, I will see you next Wednesday. All right, thanks. Bye-bye.